Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link Trait and Ignite herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Ignite are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we wanted to discuss the difference in weeds that we see out in fields that have been tilled versus those fields that haven't been tilled. So if you're a non-farmer, you may be thinking, well, the weeds should be the same, right? Because they're all gonna come from seed, and the seed's already in the field, so what difference does it make if a farmer does tillage versus if he doesn't? But it makes a huge amount of difference. Let's get into that, Darren.
Well, it sure does. You look at a field like this field. Now, granted, we're not in the middle of the growing season, but this field was completely tilled in the fall. And once you do that, you've wiped out all those weeds that would germinate in the fall, winter annual weeds, that would perhaps just go dormant during the winter, and then, wow, they're way ahead of everything else in the spring. We see weeds like mare's tail, for example, become big problems for farmers as they reduce the amount of tillage that they're doing. Now, you could go into some other fields of ours where we didn't do any fall tillage, or maybe we just did strip till, so we left about half of the field unworked. Well, there's some weeds that germinated late in the season. We had some shepherd's purse pop up. We had a little bit of mare's tail pop up, some biennial sage, dandelions. Yeah, there are a number of weeds in our area that pop up and around the country in no-till fields, or fields that you don't work in the fall, compared to what happens in the tilled fields.
Okay, and then you go to those tilled fields versus the no-till fields. The ones that we have more problem with are, for example, volunteer corn. So like this fall, corn got really dry during harvest, so a lot of farmers are pulling dry corn out of the field. That sounds great because they don't have to spend money to dry the corn down in order to sell it or store it. However, when the corn is really dry at harvest, it can shell off and it just bounces right off that combine head and bounces onto the ground. So you've got a whole bunch of volunteer corn potentially going into a soybean crop this next year. Well, when you do tillage, basically what you've done is you've planted all those seeds. You've put some dirt, you've pushed it right over the top of those seeds, and now you have all kinds of volunteer corn. Whereas when we go no-till, or maybe even to some degree strip-till, but especially on the no-till side, those corn kernels will just sit on top of the ground, and a lot of them won't even germinate. So it makes a huge amount of difference if you're raising soybeans or any other crop that is not corn, and you don't want to have volunteer corn out there. You reduce the amount of tillage, you'll have less volunteer corn.
Well, now you speak in the ideal terms, Brian. Most farmers that do tillage would like to do it in the fall, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So they end up doing their tillage in the spring instead. We saw a case in point the year 2011. There were some farmers that wanted to do some tillage, but due to flooding or just heavy rainfall in the area, whatever the case may be, they weren't able to get anything into their field until the 1st of June. Now all of a sudden they're doing their tillage and field prep work the 1st of June. Well, they've wiped out a whole flush of weeds that they were going to have this year. And a lot of guys said, wow, I had great weed control.
Maybe, but here's the other thing. So if farmers don't do aggressive enough tillage, in other words, they have to get down and actually cut some roots off and kill plants. What happens a lot of times is these winter annuals like mare's tail, for example, you'll come along in the spring and you figure, well, I'm not going to do much tillage. I didn't get anything done in the fall. I'm not going to do much in the spring. They'll do light tillage in the spring. So just a little bit, kind of stir things around a little bit. And all they do is kind of kink up the stalk on that mare's tail. They don't kill it. So now they get great big weeds by the time their crop starts coming along.
Well, you know, that tillage makes a world of difference. The other thing, in crop, we used to always cultivate in our fields, and we'd wipe out a lot of those weeds too. Again, when you're doing less tillage or even no tillage, you just take that iron out of the equation. So we have to deal with weeds with herbicides. And when you think about weeds like Roundup resistant weeds, this gets to be even more of a problem for the farmers who have reduced their tillage. Now, obviously there are a lot of benefits to reducing tillage, but with weed control, there can be some challenges.
Yep, there can be disadvantages, but there are also advantages too. Like I said, you have less volunteer corn when you do less tillage, and there are some other weeds too. If there were some weed seeds on top of the soil surface, if you don't till those in, a lot of times they won't germinate. They might just die. That germination percentage goes down every year, so you might never have those weeds pop up. So it's really hard to say one way or the other. But I guess we just wanted you to understand it, especially if you're a non-farmer. This is something we as farmers talk about and deal with. If we do certain types of tillage, especially in the fall, we can wipe out the winter annuals and perennials sometimes. If we don't do any tillage, yes, we may have less of some weeds, but we're definitely going to have more winter annuals.
But the question, Brian, is will we have more of our weed of the week if we change our tillage program? Can you identify this week's weed?